It's time for another Mailbag Friday, so let's answer some questions from the listeners next on Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for tuning in to another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. You also can catch us on wherever you get your podcasts. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts. We're on Odyssey, and we're on YouTube. Just be sure to hit your follow button and subscribe. And questions and comments can always be left to me on Twitter or on that YouTube channel, as we just brought up. But if you're a first-time listener and you want to know a little bit more about me, well, I'm based here in Kansas City. I work at Sports Radio 810 WHB, do some co-hosting, some producing, and some hosting as well. But you know, when you come to this podcast, when you click on this link, you're going to get 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball. And today's show is brought to you by Prize Picks. They'll have Game 2 of the NBA Finals coming up on Sunday. There'll be baseball all weekend long. So head over to Prize Picks and start winning some money by picking your favorite players to do well. But we'll have more on them coming up later on in the show. Well, as we always do on a Friday, it is dedicated to the listeners and the questions that you may have. And I don't want to leave anybody out. We got about 30 questions today. So our entire episode is going to be based on questions from you, of course, the listeners, and some write-ins as well. First one we got here comes from Bubba. He asked if it's even worth the time to talk about a potential trade involving the Royals and the White Sox that would get Garrett Crochet and Luis Robert. Now, I know it's a very high price, but I do think it's a very good question because the White Sox are in the midst of their worst stretch in baseball or their franchise history. It's one of the worst stretches in all of baseball and one of baseball's worst stretches, truthfully. That's a mouthful to say, and I'm kind of just rambling at this point. But I would say at this point, nothing is going to be off the table with the White Sox. And with as many Royals influencers, I would say, personnel players, I wouldn't put it past the White Sox negotiating with the Royals. And maybe the Royals are trying to negotiate for somebody like Garrett Crochet or Luis Robert. I will say, though, I just don't think the Royals have a farm system that the White Sox are going to pull the trigger on and giving away Luis Robert or Garrett Crochet. I think Garrett Crochet likely ends up in San Diego, and I think Luis Robert likely ends up with the Dodgers because of the way that outfield has been performing. But it's certainly worth a phone call. The Royals getting another high-end starter like that would be very impressive. I just don't know with only one top 100 prospect if it's going to be doable for the Royals. But definitely worth a call from the Chicago White Sox. Next one we got here comes from Steven. What's Massey's timetable? And is there any news on Jordan Lyles? And a third one, who is your top 3 trade picks we should go after? One, with Massey, I personally wouldn't expect him back anytime in the near future, just because that back doesn't seem to be responding that well. I would imagine you might be looking more toward the second half at this point, maybe right after the All-Star break, but those back injuries can be tricky and kind of tough to evaluate, if I'm being quite honest with you. As for Lyles, unfortunately, still nothing. We have not heard a single thing on Jordan Lyles in a long, long time. I'm hoping just everything is okay with him. I just right now think the way you evaluate this situation is just not expect him back until maybe he does come back. I don't think there's really a timetable on that thing. And then with the trade picks, I think it's got to be relievers. I love Austin Adams for Oakland. I think he could be an affordable option. Tanner Scott as well. Offensively in the outfield, I mean, you could look at somebody like a Taylor Ward. I think that makes a little bit of sense. If you wanted to go for somebody like a Brendan Doyle in Colorado, I know I've said his name before, that'd be another option. In Miami, you know, if you had the resources for it, you know, a Jazz Chisholm or a Jesus Sanchez, Brian De La Cruz, some of those guys. But the outfield's going to be a little bit tougher to get an upgrade at. I think bullpen, though, would be very doable. And maybe Austin Adams, because of his price, because of his age and the strikeout numbers he's had, he may be at the top of my list for the Kansas City Royals. Next one comes from Sad Cats and Sports Caps. Who do you think would win in the fight, Casey Slugger or the T-Bone Sizzler? Also, after yesterday's performance, do you think giving MJ standing ovation could light a fire under him, a la Trey Turner? I worked actually for the Monarchs right after they had rebranded from the T-Bones. Man, those are two mascots that have big biceps, big forearms. It would be close. But I think I'm going to go with Slugger there, a lion versus a bull. I think a lion would win. It'd be close, but I think I'd have to go with a lion in that situation. So I'll go with Slugger in this particular spot. Next one for that is the MJ standing ovation. We got a couple of that, and I wonder if maybe a few people do it tonight. I'd love to see it just because it showed the fan base's support. I know that he is not a player that's gotten a lot of support, but we've seen the Mets fan base and the Phillies fan base do that for guys that are highly paid and needed to go on a tear. And last year they did it for Trey Turner when they played the Royals, and happened to Francisco Lindor earlier this year when the Royals were in Flushing playing the New York Mets. So maybe it'd give him a spark just to know that the fan base is there for him. I just wouldn't count on it. I think there's too much of the fan base that wants him optioned to Omaha for it to happen. And unlike those highly paid players where they weren't going anywhere, there's a chance that MJ could be optioned to Omaha if things don't turn around here in a hurry. This one comes from Caleb Nelson. Should we go sign Harold Ramirez? Yeah, I tweeted out about this earlier today. The metrics are not good, but you kind of look back the last 2 years, and he was a great hitter, a middle-of-the-lineup hitter for the Tampa Bay Rays. But this year, just a shell of his former self. He's only got 4 extra base hits of his 44 total hits. On-base percentage is about 286. It's better than MJ Melendez, but his defense is horrific. He's basically a DH and might be able to play a little bit of the outfield and first base. He would be cheap, though, and if you were banking on him bouncing back, that'd be quite the addition to the lineup. I just don't know, though. I don't know, with as bad as the metrics have been, if it's going to be worth it and if the Royals will be interested. But if he does come into Kansas City, I would love to see if that 2022 or 2023 version could come back. He's also a great hitter against lefties this year. His OPS plus is north of 130 on that. So he's got a pretty significant split against left-handed hitters if you were looking for a platoon bat. And we know Matt Quatrero likes to really go with that righty-lefty matchup stuff with his lineup from time to time. Aiden asks, is this next stretch of games after playing the Dodgers, does that stretch leading up to the All-Star break help Melendez break out of his slump going against bad pitching? Well, I don't know if bad pitching is really that much of a bonus for MJ Melendez. I don't really care who he faces. Yeah, it would be great to see some of those balls fall. But even Jake Eisenberg, broadcaster for the Royals, put out a tweet today that he is the unluckiest hitter in all of baseball. Not trying to make excuses, but for him, I think he just needs hits. It doesn't matter if it's bad pitching or good pitching. Yeah, it certainly could be an added bonus, but I don't know even if bad pitching is going to help MJ Melendez turn the corner. It just kind of has to happen. If you pick up what I'm putting down here, I'm kind of done pinpointing who he needs to face, when he needs to be in there. It just has to happen, if I'm being quite honest with you. Next question comes from Tom. Obviously, it depends on the return, but is there any prospect in the system you'd be disappointed in them trading? I can't think of one I'd be set on not losing if the return feels sufficient. And that's what it comes down to at the end of the day. If the deal is sufficient enough, you're not really going to be too worried about it. For me, I wouldn't like to see Blake Mitchell go just because he was your first-round pick last year. I wouldn't like to see Blake Walters go. I've heard such great things in the organization about him. Ben Kudner as well. Local ties, went to my high school. That might be a little bit more biased. But Gavin Cross, he was somebody at the beginning of the year I would have said no, but can't stay healthy right now. Caden Wallace isn't healthy. I mean, those guys, it would be unfortunate to see them go, but it's not like they are pounding on the door of the big league level. Nobody really is at that point. So, yeah, I would say really the guys you took last year, those would be on my no trades. But if the deal was sufficient enough and you got a young guy with multiple years of control, maybe in the end it would be worth it. And last one for the first segment, how long until Walk is back? This one comes from JHB 2006. How long until Walk is back? Any idea what we could possibly see with Walter Pennington? And also updates on Lyles. Yeah, the Lyles thing we already touched on. Michael Walker, I'd expect him back maybe early July if everything progresses well. And with Walter Pennington, I'd say a matter of time at this point. With the 3 lefties in the bullpen pitching so well, maybe there's not a spot for him, but I'd imagine here in the next month or two, he's got to be in a big league bullpen because he's just tearing it up in AAA Omaha right now. Really, really good stuff. And I'm sure the Royals have definitely taken notice to that. Okay, that's done for our first round of questions here on a Mailbag Friday. We're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we've got 10 more to get into and then 10 more after that. That's coming up on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. You can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. Before we go any further, want to give a shout out to one of our sponsors today in Policy Genius. And if you are one of those people like me that's not as familiar with life insurance, but you want to be taken care of, Policy Genius is going to have that covered for you, because you can't always predict when something is going to happen. You don't know when certain things can be happening, how to handle those things, but Policy Genius is going to have you covered with that. And they make it so easy on you. They're one of the top insurers in America, and they're going to have that personalization for you. Policy Genius has no incentive to recommend one insurer over the other, so you can trust their guidance on that. And your work life insurance policy may not offer enough protection for your family's needs. And even worse, it may not come with you if you leave your job. So get the peace of mind by finding the right life insurance with PolicyGenius.com. Head to PolicyGenius.com or click on the link in the description that we give you to give you your free life insurance quotes and see how much you could save. That's PolicyGenius.com. We also want to let you know about one of the new sponsors that we have here today in PXG. I say today, really over the last couple of weeks. I really want to know if some of you guys have been going out there to get your custom fitting at PXG Golf. They're so helpful over there. It's a really cool setup inside. And when you can use the golf simulator, use the TrackMan, it makes you feel like a professional golfer. I know my game needs a lot of work, but when I was in there getting the praise, really getting the right club to fit me, the driver that I've been talking about, it made me feel so much better about my golf game. And it's really an easy setup that you can have here. And if you use our code of Locked On MLB Royals, you're going to be set up perfectly with all of that. So again, visit pxg.com/LockedOnRoyals to schedule your fitting at PXG Kansas City at 7517 West 119th Street in Overland Park. And you can get fitted for any club and you'll get a dozen golf balls free. That's pxg.com/LockedOnRoyals to schedule your fitting. pxg.com/LockedOnRoyals. And the limit, 1 dozen golf balls per person. This promotion ends on June 30th. Those other terms and conditions may apply, but you can see the store for details. We still got plenty of more questions to get into, and I don't want to waste any more time on that. So as soon as I can get my Twitter feed to load up here, we'll get right back into the action on a Mailbag Friday. This one comes from Walk Season. Anyone from the Cardinals pen we should be interested in trade-wise? Obviously, Kittredge and Romero come to mind. It's interesting. I don't know if it's the way of business for the Cardinals. I just never view them as sellers. I don't know, even if they were 5, 6, 7 games out, if they would be willing to trade. And also, there's never been a scenario in which the Royals were buyers and the Cardinals were sellers, and they made a deal with each other, or at least not one that comes to mind immediately, maybe way back when. But the Cardinals historically have always been buyers at the deadline. So maybe I just haven't dove into that too much because I don't think the Cardinals are going to be selling, because I think they're going to be around 500 in that National League Central and the wild card. Go take a look at the wild card picture in the National League. It's not that impressive at all. I think the Cardinals will believe they'll have a chance. So anybody in the Cardinals bullpen, likely not, because I don't think they're going to be selling anybody in their bullpen. This one comes from Jeff. I know you mentioned it last night. If we go 5-5 over the next 10 games, that would make us 8-11 over the tough stretch, and it wouldn't be that bad. My question is, how many games over 500 would be ideal by the All-Star break? Do you think we make a trade before the break? Well, J.J. McCullough, he's never going to be that general manager that just waits until the deadline like Dayton Moore did to make trades. We saw last year in June, the Royals make that trade for Cole Reagans, I think it was. I believe it was before July. So they were willing to strike when the iron was hot, or is that strike when the pan is hot, the iron is hot, whatever it is. But I don't think he's going to be scared away if a deal presents itself in June here the next couple of weeks. So if I had to pick, yes, I think a deal is going to be made before the All-Star break. And number two, I think the goal should be about 10 games over 500 by the All-Star break. But if I'm being realistic, as long as you are over 5 games over 500, or you're right at 5 games over 500, a little bit over that, I think that should be the goal, because I believe that final wild card spot at the end of the day is going to be a team that is just above 500, and that would keep them right on pace. But good question there from Jeff. KC Sports fan, KU plus Mizzou asks, when's Massey going to be back? I don't think he is really that close, but also the good thing is if it progresses well and he suddenly starts feeling a lot better, they may be able to decide that he doesn't need a rehab stint and they can just put him back in Kansas City. But I think they can take their time with it a little bit. You don't need to rush him back. And I didn't think they rushed him back when he returned in, mid-May. It just flared back up. And that might be a thing for the rest of the year, that his back just isn't going to be 100%. So you want to take this as slowly as you can. And if Adam Frazier, Nick Lofton, and Garrett Hampson get locked down second base, all the better for the Royals. But right now, I don't think there's an immediate return for Michael Massey. This one comes from Bobby Clark, again on the MJ Trey Turner treatment. Let me know tonight. I'm not going to be out there tonight, but let me know if there is a little bit of an ovation. I don't see it just because of the reaction I've gotten on Twitter from a lot of fans out there. I don't know. I think it'd be great for him just to see the support, but I think there's too many fans out there that don't want him to be up in the lineup every single day. We'll see. Maybe it would give him the confidence boost that he needs. RB Carr asks, better strategy at the deadline, getting one premium reliever / closer to shut down games, or get two lesser arms that can provide more quality depth and matchup versatility. See, I think the Royals went after the quantity approach with their bullpen in the offseason, so I'd like to see the quality approach. I would much rather have one premium reliever than two guys that may not move the needle but are good enough. If you can get a big-time strikeout guy in the back end, your 7th, 8th, and 9th gets a lot more clear, gets a lot easier. You can go with Schreiber, MacArthur, and then you'll have your premium guy, if you will. And then you can also have Angel Serpa, Sam Long, Will Smith, Nick Anderson when he's going well, Chris Stratton when he's going well, to come out of that bullpen. And maybe, Will Klein and Walter Pennington can provide some value to that bullpen as well. But I'd much rather go over the quality than the quantity in this trade approach. This one comes from EK13th. With Nelly finally out of his funk, it looks like this team is one last outfield at bat away from having a pretty set lineup. Who do you think has the best chance of providing that? It is someone in the system, on the roster, maybe even a trade piece. If they are going to significantly boost this outfield, I think it's going to be a trade piece. I've said it before. I don't think that somebody down in Omaha is going to be the end-all, be-all. I don't think they're going to be the fix. Drew Waters, he could be up in Kansas City, but I kind of think he would have been here by now if the Royals felt like he was an answer. Same thing goes for CJ Alexander and Nick Pratto. If the Royals are going to get that upgrade in the outfield, I 100% believe it's going to be a trade piece. Brian Sweeney's fan account, why isn't Lofton playing more? Between him, Hampson, and Frazier, I think he's the best and certainly has the most potential. In my opinion, Frazier is the worst, but he gets the most reps. I don't get how they're handling the second base spot without Massey. Well, Matt Quintero is going to go matchups to matchups with that. He's not going to give one of those guys the second base job every single night. If Nick Lofton has a good matchup against a pitcher who has bad numbers against right-handers, he'll be in there over Adam Frazier. We really haven't seen Garrett Hampson at second base too much. I feel like when he plays, it's almost always in the outfield. Not saying he hasn't played at second base, because he has. But, Adam Frazier, more experience there. He started a ton of games for the Baltimore Orioles, who won 100-plus games last year. So they know what they're getting there. With Nick Lofton, the potential may be there, but this may not be the time to try that out as him with the everyday second base position. I think they're just going to mix and match until Massey is back, and they'll go from there. But I know a lot of people out there want Nick Lofton to play. I just don't see him being an everyday player while this team is 11 games over 500. Austin asks, White Sox are apparently accepting package offers for Luis Robert. Is that someone that would interest you, or is he too injury prone? I'd absolutely be interested in Luis Robert. I just don't think that the Royals have what the White Sox are looking for. With as bad as that roster is, with as much help as the farm system needs, not having a top 10 pick next year, or at least the highest they can pick is 10th, they're going to need an absolute haul. And I just think they're going to go to the Dodgers for that. The Dodgers have a struggling outfield. Luis Robert seems like the perfect fit there, and I hate to say it, but I know the Dodgers are going to be in on Luis Robert, and the Royals, they're just not going to be able to keep up or meet that asking price the White Sox will be setting. Okay, we're going to take our final break of the show. When we come back, we'll wrap it up with all the questions we have next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. You can always find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. And we want to give one last shout out, to one of our final sponsors today. in Prize Picks. And if you're thinking about gambling on NBA, NHL, baseball, Prize Picks is a really fun spot to go do it when you're picking your favorite players to do well, because Prize Picks makes it fun for you. And with Prize Picks, you can turn $10 into $1,000 in a single game watching your favorite sports this summer. And you can make Prize Picks lineup in as little as 60 seconds. You just need to pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stats projections, and you are locked in. Now, this is optional for June only, because there's always action on Prize Picks, and this is the perfect time to try out something new as basketball is winding down. So make sure to try out esports this month as well, because for every Wednesday and Saturday in June, if your lineup doesn't win, you'll get more in your entry fee back. Choose from Counter-Strike 2, Call of Duty, League of Legends, and much, much more. So download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match of up to $100. That's code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match of up to $100. Well, let's wrap up this Friday with the final questions we have on the mailbag. This one comes from Josh. How much confidence should I have in this team making the playoffs? Part 2, would they target an outfield bat to try and spark the offense for the playoff push, or is Drew Waters going to get the call up this July? Drew Waters might be on the roster this year. I really don't know. But if they are serious about making a playoff push and want outfield help, I think it'd be through trade. As for buying into the playoffs, I feel like this has been such a hard thing to do for a lot of fans out there, and maybe the fans that are, scared of getting hurt. Look, here's the way I'd phrase it. Royals fans begged for good baseball for so long, even before 2013 and 14 and 15. And yeah, there were still times in those years where there was pessimism. I don't think you go through an entire baseball season, everybody's screaming sunshine and rainbows about the team. But for where this team was last year, if you're not buying in, I guess I won't fault you. Like I said, I'm never going to be the gatekeeper of a fan base and say you have to buy in to be there in the playoffs. Like, what are you truthfully scared of? If you're wrong, they collapse, they bottom out. Okay, well, did you enjoy being negative and pessimistic for the entire season? Like, who are you wanting to prove wrong? Like, I think in sports that it's all right to buy in and be hurt by it. Sports are there for the love of it, to have the emotion, the highs and lows of it. I mean, we're now less than 100 games to go. It's a long season, but I would say buy in. And for the playoff, I know it's more so what you were asking for, and I promise I'm not angry at the question. I'm more so the people that keep commenting to me being angry about the team and saying, oh, they're still terrible, they're still this and that. I guess do whatever you want. For playoffs, like I think there's a real world you can start scoreboard watching, and there's never going to be a guarantee until you're locked into a playoff spot that you're going there. You can always collapse at any point in time. But if you want to start being serious about if they're going to be in contention, I'd say you can buy in now. They hold a playoff spot by 5 games, and the teams chasing them for that playoff spot aren't that impressive to me. They're really not. It's Boston, Tampa Bay, and Detroit, and Texas can make a push as well, but they can't stay healthy right now. Detroit, the Royals swept. Tampa Bay, they took 2 of 3 from. Boston, they haven't seen yet, but Boston is so wishy-washy when it comes to being around 500. So I think right now you can start scoreboard watching. I can't tell you they're going to playoffs. Maybe if they're in September and they have a playoff spot by 8 games, at that point you can say, yeah, they're going to be there. But I think it's more than okay to buy in right now and say, hey, they're a playoff team. And if you're wrong, you're wrong. That's the beauty of sports, or I guess the downside of sports. I think if you're not buying in now, if you're still waiting for the collapse, you're just missing some fun baseball right now, and baseball we haven't seen for a long time in Kansas City. Next question comes from Charles. How surprised you that Nick Lofton hasn't had a big league home run yet? He did have some pop in the minor leagues. It's not always going to translate to the big league level. I think it'll be somewhere weird. I remember like Cam Gallagher back in 2017 had a grand slam in Oakland. I think that was his first home run. Maybe Nick Lofton's comes in Oakland, or maybe it comes at the K. It's hard to hit one at the Ks, we all know. I guess I'm not super shocked. I don't see him coming up to the plate and expect power. I expect more of a singles hitter. But one of these days he is going to run into it because he's got that type of power, and he showed it down at the minor league level. KC Preds fan asks, are Massey's injury problems enough to raise concerns about him actually being the second baseman in the future of this team? I think this guy is honestly the better second baseman, and one of the better second basemen in the league. But when he's healthy, but injuries continue to be a problem for him. Yeah, I think the Royals will probably have to start seeing if durability and production is going to be an issue for him. I'd love to see him come back and hit it in stride and not really look like he's missed much, but it's hard to do with back injury. So for me, I do think you have to start looking next year if he can't really come back and perform, if he is the second baseman in the future. It's the cold reality of Major League Baseball. This one comes from Ben. Do you think we even take one game from the Dodgers, especially when we were in their house? Yeah, I think it's certainly possible. They'll have Cole Reagan and Seth Lugo at least lined up to start in that series. I'd imagine they can take at least one. The Dodgers, they are incredibly good, but there still are holes on that team. And the Royals will probably come down to the bullpen, holding down a lead late, which is tough to do against a lineup like that. But yeah, I think you can go in expecting to win at least one of those games because the Royals haven't been swept to date. This one comes from Andrew. How do we convince people to trust in Renfroe and Velasquez until July while the team is winning? And how do we get the people on Will Smith redemption arc train? Again, I'll say it with the same fans that are waiting for the collapse. Fans that are going to be negative about those players really aren't going to change their ways. And fans that are positive about those players are probably not going to be negative about those players. So no use in trying, I'll tell you that. It is just the way of baseball fans. It's too long of a season to like completely buy in and not expect a bad stretch to happen or not expect a good thing to happen. I'm on the Renfroe train right now. I'm on the Nelly train, and Will Smith has been better than he was at the beginning of the year. So for right now, those are guys you can count on a little bit, but I don't think there's going to be a way to convince people who are completely out on them. This one comes from Brody. Right now, do you start Singer or Walker in Game 3 of a wild card series? Personally, I'm starting Walker, but would love to hear your thoughts. 100% Walker. I would take the experience there, the postseason experience, and Brady Singer to me, I just wouldn't want to see in a playoff game. It's not recency bias to how he looked in Cleveland. I'd be all right with Brady Singer kind of being the swing man in the rotation. At this point, I might even go with Alec Marsh in a Game 4 start over Brady Singer. But yeah, it'd be Reagan's Lugo Walker for me in a best-of-3 wild card series. Chance asked, what kind of offer would you put together for Hunter Harvey, Jesse Winker, package deal to help address some of the immediate needs? I would probably try to stay outside the top 5 there. Maybe that would lead me to like a Hunter Owen, and I love Hunter Owen, one of the draft picks from last year, maybe a Carson Rockefeller. Maybe you go a little bit further down the list and you look at, let's think about this. Maybe you could package somebody. I would hate to do Chandler Champlain, but if it was a 2-player deal, you probably have to look into that outlet a little bit. Wouldn't want to go with Daniel Vasquez. I'm too high on him. Too many of the younger guys in the system. Yandel Ricardo, who just recently started playing in the system. None of those 18, 19-year-old kids. I think you look more at the seasoned college guys. So maybe a Hunter Owen, Carson Rockefeller type of deal. Again, I'm trying off the top of my head, think of even who's in the top 20. It'd be anyone in the 10 to 20 range. That'd probably be my best answer there on that chance. 643 Royals asked, Harold Ramirez just got DFA'd by the Rays. Should the Royals go get him? Touched on this a little bit. It's a cheap possible deal. And if the Royals wanted just a platoon bat, maybe it could make sense for him. I just don't know if they like everything about his game. Certainly the Rays didn't. It'd be more so in hoping the old version of Harold Ramirez returns and maybe a change of scenery could do that. And lastly, this one comes again from 643 Royals. 10-game stretch versus the Mariners, Yanks, and Dodgers. What's your record prediction? Oh, man. I think I'm going to go 4-6 on that. Now, I would shoot for 500, keep it at 11 games over 500. But if you leave that 10-game stretch at 4-6, you'd be 10 games over 500. And I believe that's exactly where I hoped they would be. I think they were 15 games or 14 games over 500 when that series began in Minnesota. So I think it'll be 4-6 or 5-5, truthfully, when it all comes down to it. So that's, I think, my best guess for the 10-game prediction. Well, that's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. You can always find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Before we say goodbye, one last shout out to Locked On Sports Today. It's here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now, available for free on the Fire TV Channels app. Well, on Monday, when we return to action, we'll have a full breakdown of what happens in the Seattle series. Daniel Lynch goes tonight. Should be a fun one lined up with some great pitchers coming from Seattle's side. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.